All right, it's 5 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our third live session for AIM. On tonight's agenda, we are going to be covering 4 different campaign types. This is, of course, for the purpose of your IMAP Part 3, the traffic and promotion strategy. But we'll be covering the broad campaign, the targeted campaign, intention-based paid, as well as newsletter sponsorships. We're also going to go over some advertising goals and measurement metrics, as well as the IMAP Part 3 and the strategic planning worksheet. And I'm going to run through an example there. And then, of course, we'll wrap up our session with our week 3 assignment, the IMAP Part 3. And then, of course, we'll have any questions. If you have questions along the way, please raise your hand. You can also use our chat window down here. I do monitor both. And then, of course, be respectful to everyone in attendance tonight. All right, this week is our traffic and promotion week. This is probably the most difficult week in the class simply because we are setting numeric goals and projections. We're doing some research, looking for some things that we may have never looked for before in regards to online advertising. So going back to week 1, we defined who our audience members were, so we know exactly who it is that we are going to be speaking to through our advertisements. And then, of course, in week 2, you guys created a testing framework to challenge any audience assumptions. So now in week 3, we need to drive qualified traffic, people who are potentially interested in your company's products or services to your website so they can hopefully convert to a customer. And that's why we have our traffic and promotion strategy. And in this class, we are going to be covering 4 different campaign types. Of course, there are many other different types of paid media out there, but in this class, we are going to focus on these 4. The first type of campaign is a broad campaign, and the audience that you would be focusing on here is going to be extremely large, probably not going to have a lot of your own target audience members contained here. But that's okay. But we are looking at targeting people who are in the intro stage of ATIS because at this stage of the decision-making process, it's early on. And the more times they see your company, it's offering maybe some points of differentiation, and people will be, more open to ideas. And the more times they see you, the more times they are likely to remember you and your company. So that's what we're doing here with the broad campaign. And the types of ads that we would use for this campaign, it's going to be essentially display ads, any and all shapes and sizes, text ads like the advertorial, which is written like a mini newspaper article that sells your company's products or services. Video ads are also very popular, as well as some of the fancier type ads like point roll. Those are the ads that actually will float across content that you're trying to read on a website because, of course, it's trying to get your attention. And that's what we would do with a broad campaign. All right, the next type of campaign is a targeted campaign. It is very similar to the broad campaign. However, the audience you would be wanting to show your ad to here is going to be much more targeted and in line with your own company's target audience members. So we are going to see, all different shapes and sizes of display ads here. Once again, we're trying to target people on the intro stage of the ATIS model. Because once again, early on in the decision-making process, if they see your brand enough times, they are more likely to remember you over the long run. And both the broad and the targeted campaigns are awesome because they're going to help fuel our third campaign here, the intention-based paid campaign, which I'll get to in a moment. But they help raise that brand awareness and make people aware that your company exists, that the offer exists, and of course, if they see you enough times, they're going to remember you and possibly even initiate a branded search. Maybe 5 days from now, maybe immediately, or maybe, in 6 weeks or so. We don't know. But that's why we use the broad and the targeted campaigns is to help, of course, raise attention and interest within the ATIS model. And we use them solely for the purpose of brand awareness. And conversion rates for both the broad and targeted campaigns probably aren't going to be very high with a broad campaign. In my experience, I don't think I've had a campaign convert much over 1%. Targeted campaigns, you could probably get away with a 2.5% conversion rate. but that would be kind of stretching it because these campaigns, especially with display ads and other forms of advertising besides paid search, they typically have much lower conversion rates. And keep in mind, you're targeting people in the interest stage of ADA, so they're not ready to make a decision yet, so they may not even click. All right, our next campaign, the third one, the intention-based paid campaign. This is our paid search campaign. And the audience, of course, is going to be very focused here because, of course, they're using keywords to initiate a search to find your company. And you guys may have conducted keyword research in previous classes. I think in Maria's class, she may have had you guys do some keyword research. But in this class, we're going to kick it up a notch and we're going to be focusing on solely branded keywords. And branded keywords are those that contain your company name, a variation of your company name, misspellings of your company name, your company URL, maybe the company name plus a broad term, or the company name plus a maybe a specific product name. Those are a few examples right there of what branded search terms are. And remember, with our broad and our targeted campaigns, we want to use both of those to fuel our intention-based paid campaign. We want people to remember us and to initiate those branded searches. So we would be targeting people who are in the action stage of the ADIS model. So these people are ready to make a decision. They're ready to convert right away. And with paid search, text ads, of course, are typical, like the ones you guys created in week 1 of the class. Those are the types of ads that we would be using to draw people in. And then finally, we have our newsletter sponsorship, and this is different than a standalone or a solo email where your company would maybe send out its own newsletter. That's not what I'm talking about here. What a newsletter sponsorship is where your company would go out and find a partner company. Of course, not a competing company because they probably wouldn't let you advertise to begin with, but you want to find a partner company whose content or products or services are going to complement your own company's products or services. So essentially, you're teaming up here. So once again, we're focusing on the action stage of ADIS, so people who are ready to convert. And placement within an email newsletter, placing a display ad or a text ad. Advertorials are popular in email newsletters. It can be very pricey depending on where it's located. The real estate above the fold in an email newsletter is typically your most expensive. That is the area that a subscriber would see when they open the message before they actually have to scroll down and continue reading the message. So up towards the header can be a little bit more pricey. And also in my experience with email marketing in general, I also teach a class on email, but placement within a newsletter, since people tend to read in an F-shaped pattern, I would recommend a left sidebar placement or placement within the actual content itself, preferably towards the left-hand side because of how we read. But once again, it can be pricey. Also, it's not uncommon to see multiple ad placements within a single newsletter. One company that I had consulted before had about 3 different placements for potential real estate areas within the newsletter where sponsors could place ads. And one time they actually ran an ad for a cruise line. So they had a header ad, they had a small left sidebar ad, and then of course they had an ad again towards the footer that all of course had the same look and feel. But, it all depends on where the ad is placed. Definitely, the higher up towards the header is the best, but because of the way people read. And, when they first open the message, they'll see it right then and there. Also, excuse me, we see a lot of display ads in newsletters. We also see a lot of text links as well. And once again, placement can be very important here. All right, those are our campaign types. We're now going to cover some advertising goals and measurement metrics. We're going to go through some common metrics, and then we're going to run through an example with our strategic planning worksheet. And keep in mind the metrics and the formulas I'm about to show you, these are already programmed in the strategic planning worksheet because that's essentially a calculator that we use when we're making goals and projections for potential advertising campaigns. But it's still best to know the story behind the numbers and how they came to be and how they work with one another. So that's why I want to run through these just real quickly. The first one is cost per visitor. And this is where you would take an advertising cost for a specific period. In this class, we are going to focus on a 30-day period and then divided by the number of visitors for that same period. And that's essentially how much each visitor is going to cost you. Next, we have revenue per visitor. You may remember from last week when I talked about the basic revenue formula. That's where we multiplied average transaction value, or ATV, by conversion rate by visitors, and that equaled revenue. So we would then take revenue for that same period and divide by the number of visitors for that period, so we can see essentially how much revenue we are earning per visitor. And then next, we have margin per visitor. This metric in particular, as well as revenue per visitor, are excellent indicators of campaign profitability. You always want these numbers to be positive. If either one of these are negative, that essentially means you would be losing money per visitor, and we definitely don't want that to happen in advertising. So the margin per visitor is where you would subtract cost per visitor from revenue per visitor. This is the amount of money that is left over per visitor once your advertising costs are satisfied by revenue. Okay, next we have our advertising to revenue ratio, also known as the ad spend to revenue ratio. And this is where we would, of course, divide cost per visitor by revenue per visitor. And this is expressed as a percentage of revenue. So with this ratio in particular, we want to keep it beneath 50%, simply because we don't want all of our revenue to be consumed by advertising costs. So when you're first starting out with your goals and projections, that's a good rule of thumb to follow. Next, we have exposures, also known as impressions. Many of you maybe have come across something called a CPM pricing model, and CPM stands for cost per milli. In other words, cost per 1,000 impressions. So if you say you come across a $5 CPM rate, that means you would pay $5 for every 1,000 impressions served up, or opportunities for people to see your ad. That's all an impression is an opportunity for somebody to see your ad. Doesn't necessarily mean that they saw it, they read it, they acted on it, clicked on it, interacted with it, so on and so forth. But it still is an opportunity to get in front of a set of eyes. And with broad and targeted campaigns, you will see ad space sold on a CPM basis quite a bit of the time. And of course, that goes in line with what those campaign goals are. We're trying to raise brand awareness, and it doesn't matter if people really click on our ad. We just want to get in front of a set of eyes and make our name more well known, so people are more likely to remember us. All right, next we have click-throughs. And this is the number of people who have actually clicked on a hyperlink and arrived on your landing page. And then we have our click-through rate, where we would divide clicks by exposures and then multiply it by 100. And this is the percentage of exposures that clicked on the hyperlink and arrived on your landing page. Okay, just a few more to get through before we run through our example here. But we have the branding view-through rate, also known as view-through tracking, and this is something your web analytics would be keeping track of course, through cookies. And going back to when I was discussing how the broad and the targeted campaigns would help fuel branded search, this metric is important for that, because maybe a prospect saw your display ad while browsing one of the news sites that they frequent. But they didn't act on it. When that view happened, a cookie was placed on their device, and maybe a few weeks passed. Then they initiated a branded search using possibly your company name, and they arrive on your website that way. That would be registered as a view through, and that means that person saw your ad, they didn't click on it, but then they initiated a branded search and arrived on the website that way. So you can attribute the lead source. You can say, okay, this person actually saw my display ad and possibly even acted on it and arrived on my website. And that's what view-through tracking is. It helps you gauge brand awareness to a certain extent online. Next, we have our cost per click. And this is where we take our advertising costs and divide by number of clicks. And then, of course, we have our cost per conversion. That's where you would take your advertising cost or ad spend and then divide by number of conversions. And that's essentially how much each conversion cost your company. All right, those are the metrics. Now we're going to dive into the strategic planning worksheet. First of all, what is it? It's a calculator. That's all it is, plain and simple. It looks really intimidating when you open it, but I assure you it's really not. We need it because before you spend a single cent of advertising budget, you would have to create goals and projections for your campaigns to, of course, measure campaign performance against, and to potentially project revenue for either your client or your company. And so that's essentially why we need it. And in this class, we are only going to be updating 3 variables. Your average transaction value, educated estimates are perfectly fine here. Also the conversion rate. But I will say the conversion rates that you currently see in the worksheet are pretty conservative. So if you're not comfortable updating those, I'm okay with that. But if you want to adjust them slightly, that's fine too. And then, of course, exposures or opportunities for people to see your advertisement. And I created an example just to help illustrate how to use the worksheet and to do some of the research we need for the IMAP Part 3. But my client here is Adidas Running Shoes, and they need a broad paid placement to advertise their Energy Boost brand and to make more potential customers aware that the brand and the product even exists. So here is an example of what the product looks like. I want to make note of the price tag here. It's $150, which would be my average transaction value. So if I flip over to the worksheet, I could actually update my average transaction value across the board to $150. And that's the first thing I recommend everybody do here. All right, going back to the presentation here. So I have to find a broad paid placement for them. So a potential placement, of course, I did my research ahead of time here before I came here, but it's going to be on runnersworld.com. And I could do a number of things. I could find a rate card or a media kit. Even if I do find a rate card or a media kit, I still want to use a tool like similarweb.com or Alexa or Quantcast to make sure that their traffic numbers are inflated. Because in my experience, when I was doing media buying, companies or online ad vendors, what they would like to do is put in, of course, they would say we have 7 million unique visitors. Yeah, that's great. That happened in December of last year. What does your traffic look like throughout the rest of the year? So you kind of have to do your due diligence there to make sure that these numbers aren't overinflated in the rate card. But I am going to use a tool like SimilarWeb. Let me flip over to that. And I've already had it pulled up, but you could just type in any URL up here in the search bar, and it will give you a lot of really great information that you could use for this IMAP Part 3. And of course, I'm sure other assignments too in our program. But it gives you a traffic overview, and I like this because it goes back 6 months. So we can see back in February 2018, Runner's World was getting about almost 4.5 million visitors, monthly visitors. And it seems pretty steady. Of course, marathon season kicks off in April, so they have more visitors, and then it slumps in the summer. Totally normal. So, but they haven't gone beneath 4 million. So I would say that they roughly get about 4 million visitors a month, which those are potential page views for me or exposures. And if we keep scrolling down, we can see where the traffic is originating from. More than half is from the US. You can see how people are actually accessing this website. Are they on finding it through search? Are they typing in the URL directly? So on and so forth. Going down here to referrals, these are some referring sites where people had, of course, visited prior to going to Runner's World. And these actually could be potential ad placements for Adidas as well, letsrun.com, or this one right here, verywellfit.com. Those could be potential ad placements for Adidas. We can also see that a few organic search terms that enter the site, best running shoes. That's a positive sign for me because people are coming here to look for gear, which is great for Adidas. And of course, we can see if they get any social media traffic. Most of it comes from Facebook, it looks like. And they get very little traffic from display ads. Once again, display ads with our broad and targeted campaigns are usually not going to produce a ton of clicks or traffic. We keep scrolling, we can see where the majority of traffic is funneled once people get to the actual website, what subdomains they're going to. And then we can also get the audience interest. So they're interested in news and media, shopping and clothing, and of course, health. Okay, if we can also look at competing sites. These also would be great potential ad placements for Adidas. So you can get a few good ideas here. If you're not sold on maybe an online vendor you were looking at, maybe you can get a few ideas by looking at some of their competitors. Right, and then here is their mobile app that they have. And that is about it. So the main takeaways from this is definitely the traffic numbers, as well as what the audience looks like and what their interests are. And are they in line with what your customers' interests are? And in this case, everything looks positive. People are interested in running and health, and of course, the best running shoes. So that's all very positive for me with Adidas. And it looks like they have roughly the average, I would say, no more than 4 million visitors per month. And that's just being conservative, of course. So what am I going to do with this data? I'm going to go back to our strategic planning worksheet, and I'm now going to create an exposure goal. They have at least 4 million visitors per month. So of course, if I'm planning a future month, I would be planning for September would be my next available ad campaign. I could probably put up to 4 million exposures. Of course, that could be really expensive. So I'm going to put 1 million for my goal because they should have no problem serving up that many exposures with that amount of traffic. All right, a couple of things happened. Of course, our conversions are 19. Our revenue is now $2,812.50. And then, of course, RPV, revenue per visitor, of course, is $1.13, and MPV, margin per visitor, is $1.05. One other thing that we could do is we could update the conversion rate. I probably wouldn't expect much more than a 1% conversion rate here for the broad plate placement. So I could actually update that as well. Of course, revenue jumped from $1.13 to $1.50, and of course, the margin per visitor is now $1.42. So revenue did jump because remember, going back to the basic revenue formula, anytime revenue or conversion rate or number of visitors or ATV increases, of course, our revenue is going to increase as a direct result, as we just saw here. All right, and that is how you would create your goals. And you're going to follow the same thought process for your targeted paid placement. And going back to the example with Adidas and using it, finding a broad paid placement with Runner's World, I could essentially have a couple of different campaigns run with them. And I could have a broad campaign, a broad paid placement on their homepage, perhaps. Or if they have a shoes and gear guide, I could have a more targeted placement within that. To meet a more, of course, more people who are looking to actually purchase running shoes. And then they do actually have some newsletter sponsorships. So as you're going through this assignment, if you find an ad vendor, like I did here with Runner's World, that offers multiple placements within this IMAP, you're more than welcome to use them, of course, but you do need to differentiate, especially when it comes to actually the broad and targeted campaigns. Where are these ads going to be placed? They cannot look identical. They can't both be running on the home page. You need to differentiate them if you do decide to go with the same ad vendor. All right, and then with our intention-based paid campaign, this is going to be based, the exposure goal is going to be based on keyword search volume. And in this case, branded keyword search volume. So you'll want to base that off of the research you do with your keywords. And then with our newsletter sponsorship, we are going to be basing our exposure goal off the number of subscribers on the actual list. All right, and that is how to use the strategic planning worksheet in a nutshell. Any questions so far about the IMAP Part 3? Are we good to go? All right. All right, if you do want to update the conversion rates, I do have a few benchmarks for you guys. With the broad campaign, I don't recommend exceeding 1%. Targeted campaign, you could probably do 1.5%, 2%, maybe 2.5%. Intention-based paid campaigns, 2% is actually very conservative. You could even go upwards of maybe 10 to 15%. And then the newsletter sponsorship, 2.5% is very conservative. The industry average is about 18%. So this just gives you a few ideas on how to adjust conversion rates if you feel the need to. All right. Here are some tips for updating the 3 variables. With your average transaction value, educated estimates are okay here. If you need help making that estimate, feel free to email me and I can make sure you're on the right track. Sometimes students think they are estimating too high, especially if they have a bit of a pricier product or a service. But if you need any help, just let me know. With the conversion rates, if you have access to historical data, you can adjust conversion rates or you can leave them as is. And then, of course, your exposure goal, you can base it on the number of visitors, search volume, or subscribers. And then, of course, SimilarWeb is a great tool for researching monthly visitors and visitor profiles. All right, now on to the IMAP Part 3. We're going to be planning for our 4 campaign types. With both the broad and the targeted markets, you're going to establish your exposure, your conversion rate, and your average transaction value goals for this segment. You're going to list 1 site, 1 broad, 1 targeted to meet these goals. And then, of course, you'll summarize the traffic profile and visitor profile. So for the traffic profile, you'll want to include the amount of monthly visitors, and the visitor profile, the demographic segmenting, you'll include, of course, things like breakdown of males versus females, income range, age range, so on and so forth. You'll also describe any ads that you're going to be using and explain the messaging strategy and the main goals of the ad strategy. You'll also describe special offers and incentives, and this is not something you can opt out of. Keep in mind, not every brand is going to have an appropriate offer. For example, you will never see a Rolex on sale. It just does not fit the brand image. So it can be anything that your customers would perceive as having value. One example I can think of is the use of a virtual good. At the last company I worked for, we used white paper downloads for lead form submissions. So that might be, an idea there. But any type of virtual good or any type of incentive that your customers would perceive as having value is fair game here. All right, and then you'll provide a summary of your projected revenue and costs. That includes conversions, cost, revenue per visitor, and margin per visitor. All right, then with the intention-based paid campaign, you'll, like the prior campaigns, establish the exposure goal, conversion rate goal, and ATV goals for this segment. And then you'll list 8 to 10 specific branded keyword terms to measure and protect. You'll outline the cost and conversion strategy. And within this section, what I'm looking for is, why did you select the keywords that you did? And you need to tie in the broad and the targeted campaigns, because these both of those are actually going to help fuel branded search. Right, then you'll describe the special offer and incentive and provide a summary of projected revenue and costs. And then finally, we have the newsletter sponsorship, and this is where we're going to establish exposure goals, conversion rate goals, and ATV goals. Summarize a paid newsletter sponsorship. So what I'm looking for here is, what is the name of the newsletter? What types of content is presented within the newsletter? Where is your ad going to be placed? What types of content is it going to be placed next to or near? And keep in mind, you want to select a partner company that's going to complement your brand. You'll also describe special offers and incentives and provide a summary of projected revenue and costs. All right, just a few tips. Use SimilarWeb to research traffic profiles for your selected sites for both the broad and targeted campaigns. Alexa and Quantcast are great alternatives. However, they do require you to sign up for a free trial, which is not fun. So that's why I like SimilarWeb. Also, download a media kit or a rate card. Even if you do find a media kit or rate card, please make sure you do your due diligence and research these sites using SimilarWeb or Quantcast or Alexa. And if you have access to AdWords, the Google Display Network is also a great tool for research for this assignment. And then finally, you'll want to update your exposures based on the amount of monthly visitors for both the broad and the targeted campaigns, search volume for branded keywords, and then subscribers for the newsletter sponsorship. All right, that's it from me. Do we have any questions before we wrap up tonight? All right, if any questions do come up, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be available during my office hours this week, and then next week we will be covering the final project for the class, and I'm going to be talking about email marketing and doing a demo of MailChimp, which is a free email marketing service provider tool. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend, and archive will be posted hopefully within the next 30 minutes. Have a good night.